guys, this is Jean from Happy Indulgence and I'm here to talk about the 7 books that I read during September. As you guys know, during September I was on a 3-week trip to Europe. I had a super great time. I went to London, Paris and Italy. It was amazing going there and seeing all the monuments, but because there was a lot of travel time, I think it was 27 hours on the way there, I got to read a lot. So I'm actually surprised that I actually got to go through 7 books, of which I'll talk about today. So if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button down below just to check out more videos, and I would really appreciate the support. I also have a blog article as well where I talked about my trip in more detail, so if you want to check it out, check out the link down below. Oh, and before I forget, I did get to unbox all my book mail when I got home, so I'll leave a link up above to that video. So I'm just going to get started with my books right now before I blabber on a bit too much. Alright, so the first one is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This was one of the physical hard copies that I actually brought on my trip, and I brought it along because it's a huge fantasy read that I probably wouldn't get to read if I was back home reading all my arcs and review copies, and I think it's over 600 pages as well, so it was a super long read and I wanted like big long books that I could sustain myself through my trip. Anyway, I'm really glad I read The Name of the Wind. It's one that I've heard so much hype about. It's often on a lot of like best fantasy lists and I wanted to know why. Like a lot of people say, yes, you have to read it. So it is a bit of a slow burn read. It's about a magician called Quoth, and it talks about like the life of times of Quoth as he was young, when he loses his family to assassins, I think, and then he wants to basically learn to command the power of sorcery, and he wants to get into this academy where they will teach him how to harness all these powers. So Quoth is some sort of legendary character as you learn, and a storyteller meets him in his older age when he's in a tavern and he wants to hear it from the man himself. Quoth actually recalls his past as well. Well, he's a young boy learning to get into the academy, how he has to beg on the streets, how he has to fight tooth and nail to get into this academy, and then once he's in, things aren't rosy either. So I loved hearing about his determination. I loved how he has a love and a passion for music and playing the lute, and that helps get him by as he stays in taverns. And I love just hearing about how he learns to defend himself against, you know, everything that's thrown at him in the book. It's a really great fantasy read. There's a magic system as well about binding yourself to different elements. Obviously that's what Quoth does, and then I loved hearing how he just learns to defend himself and stands up for himself and becomes this super badass legendary character that everyone loves, or that people are scared of actually. The Name of the Wind is a really worthwhile slow burn fantasy story. If you love high fantasy stories, I definitely recommend this one if you haven't read it already. I gave this one 5 stars and I really enjoyed it. Next book that I bought with me on my Europe trip is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Lynch. So same thing, it's another high fantasy read that has over 500 pages, and it took me ages to read, but as you can see, this book cover, that's actually the Bridge of Sighs in Venice, and I actually read this book when I was in Venice, so that was pretty cool as well. So The Lies of Locke Lamora is another fantasy read that I've heard a lot about. It's about a gang of thieves called the Gentleman Bastards, and they basically go into this ancient city of Camor and infiltrate the nobles and steal from them pretty much. And Locke Lamora basically does this with his pure charm and pure wit, and the way that he can swindle each and every person around him without them knowing was just really amusing. The way the story is told is a bit difficult to pick up at first because you first meet Locke as the Thorn of Camor, and he's basically already a noble and he's already ingrained in the social circles, but then as you learn a bit more about him through these flashbacks of when he learns thievery, you learn what he's trying to do as well. Anyone who's heard about vengeance will know revenge is a dish best served cold, and that's basically where this book heads. So it's a really rewarding book, even though it's super slow at the start. It's a bit hard to pick up with the storytelling style. Oh boy, it is definitely worth it. And there's also a super awesome bromance in here. Locke and Jean make really great friends and they'll do anything to support each other and save each other. And what I liked about this book as well is that Locke is super charming. He's not the greatest fighter, but he gets by. But the thing about him is that the author isn't afraid to knock him down and knock his friends down. And oh my gosh, as you get to the end of this book, it is so freaking epic. It's one of those where you have to sit down and recover and think, oh my god, did that just really happen? I'm really excited about this series now that I've picked up this book, and of course, I gave it 5 stars. The next book is City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. As you guys know who are V.E. Schwab fans, you'll know that this is her first middle grade book. So it's about a girl called Cass, and she's a young girl who has a ghostly friend called Jacob, and she can see him, she can talk to him, but no one else knows that she can see and talk to ghosts until she moves to Edinburgh temporarily because her parents have a ghostly TV show about ghostly investigations. But funnily enough, none of them know that she can actually see and talk to ghosts. So in Edinburgh, she learns a lot more about herself and more about Jacob and her ability. And I love the setting of Edinburgh and how it brought so much like historical relevance to the book. It was just a perfect setting for this. I think this was a really fun read. It does get a bit scary at times. I love the supportive friendship, even though it is an unlikely one. And just like the coming of age as well, with how Cass learns a bit more about herself and about her parents. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about Jacob, and hopefully that will be in the next book and further in the series. So I gave this one 4 stars. Next book is The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater, and I actually listened to this one on audiobook before I left for my trip. I'm so happy I picked this up because if you guys don't know, it was one of the books that I wanted to pick up on my TBR but haven't had time for yet in a video that I'll link up above. I really love the Raven Boys, and this series in general is such a mystical and complex series about, you know, about hunting ley lines, about Welsh mythology, and also the abilities of the Raven Boys as well are really incredible. So in this one we hear a lot more about a character called Ronan Lynch. He's basically a troublemaker, and there's a lot going through his head. And we find out why here. It's basically because he has a power of his dreams coming true. So he can take things from his dreams into the real life, and that's why it's called The Dream Thieves. We also learn a lot more about another Raven boy called Adam, so I liked hearing more about them after meeting them in the first book. I also love the town of Caveswater. It's like a small mystical town set on ley lines, and the mysticism running through it and the fortune telling, like, it just feels like such a quirky and magical book. One thing about this series though, it's really difficult to listen to through audiobook. Even though I really like the narration, I missed a lot of things because it's such a complex series. I actually had to pick up the recap afterwards and see what I had missed and what it was about. So I do have the rest of the books in hard copy, so I'll probably continue through that. So yeah, really enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars. Next book is Catwoman Soul Stealer by Sarah J. Maas. Being a huge Batman fan, I was excited to pick this up, and I wanted to see how Sarah J. Maas translated the character of Selena Kyle as well on paper. I loved hearing more about Selena Kyle and how she had her troubled past, basically looking after her sick sister, and how she joins the League of Assassins as well and learns all her badass skills. In the book, she does want to take vengeance on Gotham, so she's a bit of an anti-hero villain, and she forms a girl squad with Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn, and it's really fun basically just seeing them like cause havoc in this world of Gotham that we're all familiar with. The only thing about this book though is, even though the action scenes were great and I loved hearing more about Catwoman as a character herself, I found some of the characterization really stunted. Like Harley Quinn, like her dialogue was a bit forced, a bit simple and basic. She's nothing like the character that you envisage when you hear of Harley Quinn. And the other thing is, there's a character called Luke who is the love interest, and I didn't like the romance at all. I found it was quite forced, and he's basically a black man who is the son of one of the most influential and powerful families in Gotham. Sarah J. Maas actually goes on a lot about his marginalization Despite his privileged circumstances, he's suffering from PTSD as well as a recovering Marine, and it's basically like not treated with respect in this book, and I found that really problematic. So I have really mixed feelings about this. It's a really fun read with a lot of action, a lot of tension, especially if you love Catwoman. And if you don't know much about Catwoman, I think you might enjoy this a lot more too, because you're not as familiar with the characters. So I think I'll land on 3.5 stars for it. I do have a full review up on my blog if you want to know more of my in-depth thoughts about it. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy by Mackenzie Lee, and this is the sequel to The Gentleman's Guide of Vice and Virtue, which I absolutely loved earlier this year. So this book follows Felicity Montague, and she's basically a woman in the 18th century living in London, and she wants to become a physician, which is basically impossible in those times. But if there's anyone that can achieve her dreams, it's Felicity, because she's completely outspoken, she's strong-willed, she's pretty much everything that a demure 18th century woman shouldn't be. The great thing about her as well is that there's a lot of asexual representation here. She does want to escape from her circumstances, getting married to a guy that likes her. She does also fall into an opportunity later with another girl who likes her, but obviously she sticks to her morals as well, and I'm glad there was that representation. There were a few things in this book that I found interesting. So basically she meets a dodgy character called Sim, who offers to pay her way to accompany Felicity to infiltrate a family, which is one of the doctors that she looks up to. And it just so happens that the fiance of the doctor is her old friend Joanna. The thing about this book, I felt like it was a bit blatant with his messaging at times, especially about feminism, and Joanna is a girl who likes to dress up, who likes to socialize and go to parties, but in Felicity's head, because of that, she thinks she's not a strong woman, and she thinks she'll just go against the grain and be like everyone else. There's a really strong not like other girls vibe in here, just because Felicity is a bit different to others. She's not great at making friends with other females. She thinks she's kind of better than them. She does learn that lesson at the end of the book, but then just getting there, it just felt kind of preachy at times. And I was also really uncomfortable with the character of Sim, because you know it's dodgy. It's a dodgy transaction. She's willing to pay her way to help Felicity, and Felicity just ignores it, and I was just like waiting for something to happen throughout the whole book. The other thing is that it says it's the Guide to Petticoats and Piracy. There actually is like a tiny bit of amount of pirating, but yeah, I'm basically not going to spoil it, but that's not what this book is about. So this book is about three strong females learning a lot about each other, about their own journeys in the 18th century. It was interesting seeing how the author dealt with the life and times as well. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars because of the issues I had with it. The last book I'm going to talk about is Contagion by Erin Berman, and I actually read this one on Kindle on my flight to London. This was a book that I was really anticipating, basically because Amy Kaufman, who is one of my favorite authors, recommended it, and it's about like a deadly virus in space that wipes out a crew, and another crew comes along and basically wants to find out what happens. That in itself sounds like an amazing premise, but I thought the execution kind of let it down, because it talks in multiple point of view, so you learn about the roles of each of these characters, but I wasn't particularly attached to any of them. I kind of found them kind of boring and kind of bland. Because of that, I wasn't really invested in the story, and there were a lot of twists and turns, but then I found it kind of long and draggy as it goes on. So it's a bit disappointing because I really like Vengeance Road, which is Erin Berman's first book, and yeah, anyway, I gave that one 2 stars, so that's kind of a shame. So here's the books that I read during September. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on them, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more. Thanks guys, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!